So in AD 793, the people living on Lindisfarne became pretty much the first community in the British Isles to be raided by Vikings, and it heralded the start of the Viking Age. But who were these people? Historical sources tell us that there was a very famous monastery here, and they tell us about the monks and their saints and the religious folk who were here as part of that. What they don't tell us about is the other people who might have been living on the island, and it's actually archaeology that's starting to reveal that for us. Over the last few years, we've found several burials in our excavation and a few human remains scattered across the site. We can see that there are men, there are women, there are children, and they're all of varying ages and in different states of health. So who were these people, David? Who do we think they were?
Well, I think there's two groups of people being buried here apart from the monks. There's the other islanders themselves, who might have been the tenants and servants of the monks in the monastery, but also somewhere like this would have attracted pilgrims and visitors from really all over early medieval Britain, so people coming from quite some distances. So we've got these two different communities, perhaps all being buried side by side in the cemetery we're excavating.
And yet one we hear about in the history books and the other we don't quite. So do we know anything about where some of these people might have come from?
Well, we've got two types of evidence which help us kind of narrow down where these people are. First of all are the name stones. Now they're great because they actually give us some names, and so far all the names we've had have all been good Anglo-Saxon names. So that means that they're probably coming from either Northumbria itself or regions further south. But the other kind of evidence we have is the evidence from the chemistry of the bones from some of the burials we've excavated. And in that case, we've done bone chemistry analysis on two skeletons, and they seem to hint that they're actually coming over from Western Scotland. So we've always thought about Lindisfarne as being in the kind of middle of Britain, looking to the north and to the south. And I think these two sources of evidence show that we're attracting people here from different parts of the early medieval world.
It's kind of amazing. And do we have any idea how old these skeletons are, these human remains?
Well, the skeletons, we've done the bone chemistry. They're clearly adults, but we've got all the way from very, very young children. We've got some around 7 or 8, but in theory they could have been monks, to older adults. And crucially, we've got men and women. So we know our cemetery is not a monastic cemetery. It's clearly one for the wider community.
And that's really interesting as well, and it seems like there's maybe some sort of differences in status as well. Some of them are very healthy, some of them are a bit less healthy. I think there was an example of one that seemed quite malnourished and had very poor dental health as well. Does that tell us anything about the community of people that were being buried here and living here?
Well, it makes you wonder. I mean, one possible reason why someone might be have nutritional issues is they might be very poor, but interestingly the worst dietary issues were from the people who seem to have come from Western Scotland. So they'd obviously come quite a long way. And given Lindisfarne's place as a centre of pilgrimage and a centre of healing, you wonder whether these are perhaps pilgrims who've come over from the West in search of some kind of cure. Now, the fact that they died here suggests they didn't get what they were after. But it helps to understand the kind of dynamics and what would bring people to a place like this.
So the island's original name was derived from a word for healing or medicine, wasn't it?
There's an old British name, Medcaut, which is associated with the island, and that's been suggested it's got the same roots as the word medicine, and it may have had some kind of healing significance. Even, just possibly, there might have been some kind of healing tradition on the island even before the monastery was founded in the 7th century.
So these skeletons are really starting to paint us a picture of life on the island, and we've found the name stones, as you said, with the burials, and also the white quartz pebbles that we think people were bringing to the graves as tokens of commemoration, a bit like we would bring flowers to the grave. And yesterday, excitingly, we found our first proper grave good, really. We found part of a hand, finger in fact, that had 2 copper alloy rings still on the finger. I think that was the first real item that we'd found within one of the graves, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's the first time we've clearly had objects directly associated with a burial, and you can't get more directly associated than having the rings sitting over a ring finger. Frustratingly, we didn't have much of the rest of the skeleton, but it's certainly a reminder that the burial rites here, we tend to think that Christian burials don't have burial objects, but actually there's always been a tradition of small number of items being placed with the graves in both the Anglo-Saxon traditions and the Scottish and Irish traditions, which you might also find somewhere like here. So obviously we need to look at those rings more. They're going to be conserved, and once they've been cleaned up and we can have a better look at them, we'll hopefully be able to get a sense of the date and maybe any kind of cultural affiliations they might have.
So with all of those bones coming out, either as complete skeletons or in parts, what's going to happen to all of these bones next?
They'll all go back to Durham, to our labs, where we'll do the basic measurements and see whether they're male or female, pick up those evidence for diseases, maybe do a little bit of scientific dating or look at the bone chemistry. But ultimately, they're all going to come back to the islands, and we're going to work with the local church and local community to make sure they go back into the graveyard here. We've actually kept back a whole load of the quartz pebbles, which a lot of them were buried with. So ultimately, in a couple of years down the line, they can all go back together, hopefully into the churchyard behind us.
I think that would be a really nice thing to do.
I think so.
We're starting to get a really nice cross-section of society, aren't we, in this picture that we're building up from the human remains. So just in terms of the kinds of people that were here, quite a wide variation, but also in maybe slight variations in the burial practices as well, which I think is a really nice little insight, isn't it?
Yeah, we've got hints of people lying on their sides. We've got a possible grave surrounded by stone slabs, a kind of kissed burial. So there's all sorts, there's quite a lot of diversity in the way people are being buried. And that's a reminder of, these are complicated societies. I think often when we look at the grave, we just tend to think about death, but actually that's just the end point after someone's lived a rich, complicated, emotional life just in the same way we do. And I think the evidence from the chemistry and the evidence from all these traditions help us try and start thinking about this in terms of biographies of people and how they lived in life, not just what happened to them after they died.
The people that were living on the island, that's what it's all about, isn't it? Before, during and after the Viking raids.
Absolutely.
Fascinating.
I'm still sitting here looking at the sea, looking at the waves, trying to see if I can see any seals. Or kraken.
I can see something on the horizon. What is that? Is that a boat?
It might be a Farne Islands.